Ryan Noble's standing by right now. Ryan, you're not going to be covering this on CNN, are you?
No. But
No, yeah.
Governor Cuomo is definitely making some news in Washington, too, with this new deal that's happening with the healthcare law, the healthcare revision. There's a big carve-out for upstate New York that the governor's not very happy with. So,
we're just hearing that our congresswoman is supporting that, and others as well, the Republican congresspeople upstate, look like with that amendment, they'd support the health care bill, which would mean the counties would no longer be responsible for all that Medicaid money.
You know something, Bill? This issue with the counties of upstate New York paying for the lion's share of the Medicaid bill is something that I've known back when I worked for the Oneida County government, when I was youth bureau director a long time ago now. It was a big, huge problem that we dealt with back then. This is a problem that's been consistently something that county governments have been forced to deal with for a very long time. But the fact of the matter is that New York has a very expensive Medicaid program. It offers a lot more features than most Medicaid programs across the country, and that is expensive.
Yeah.
And so the upstate Republican congressmen and congresswomen are correct in the fact that it is a huge unfunded mandate and burden on county governments in upstate New York. But the governor is also correct in that if the federal government forces the state to find some other way to pay for that $2.3 billion or whatever the number is, that is going to be a huge strain on the state budget. So, even though you're kind of shifting the money around, that problem is still going to exist. It's not going to go away because you've created this new system. It might make it easier on upstate, maybe a little bit harder on downstate. The state as a whole is still going to have to come up with that money. So, this is one wrinkle of many wrinkles in this healthcare bill, but this is just an example of how these problems aren't that easy to solve.
Well, I got to tell you, too, that if this were to happen, and by the way, the state would be forced to do this or they'd lose federal funding because I think the feds pay a portion of this Medicaid money as well. So, ultimately, it's like the game of Kerplunk, right? I mean, if the state ends up having to pay, well, where do you think the state's going to get their money from?
Right. I mean, you're not going to you're transferring the problem from one thing to another. Now, there's an argument that can be made that property taxes aren't the best way to fund Medicaid, and essentially that's how New York State, particularly upstate New York, funds the Medicaid programs through property taxes, which is why when I lived in Utica and when I lived in New Hartford, my house on Hillside Avenue in New Hartford, the property taxes were way more than the house I had in Richmond, Virginia, even though the house I had in Richmond, Virginia, I bought for about $30,000 more than the house that I paid for in New Hartford. So, that hurts real estate values. That makes it a little bit difficult to raise that revenue. And then you have another problem with that, that's connected to the value of the homes going up. And so if the real estate market isn't necessarily on fire, then you're kind of stuck with this revenue source in neutral, where you need kind of a progressive growth area in terms of that tax. So that it's just that's an argument to be made separately. Is that the best way to raise that money? But regardless, the money's got to come from somewhere because there's no plan to roll back the Medicaid program in New York State. That's never going to happen. The Albany politicians are never going to go for that. So you've got to find a way to raise that money. It's got to come from somewhere.
Ryan, it's interesting because you're going to see the. Cuomo's. There's proof out there now that he is exploring at least raising money, trying to fund a presidential campaign. Do you think this is the New York Republicans in Congress? It's their way of a little checkmate with the governor. This is going to really put him in a very tough position.
I think there could certainly be an aspect of that, but I also think probably the motives are a little bit more direct than they are some sort of grand scheme or end around to hurt the governor. I mean, I think like you see some of these governors or some of these congressmen, like John Faso was one of the congressmen who just got elected. He ran for governor a couple of years ago. You may remember he got crushed by Elliot Spitzer. I think that this is a local issue. At the end of the day, politics is all local, right? So for these constituents of these members of Congress, when they go to these town halls, one of the big things that upstate New Yorkers complain about over and over and over again is their property tax bill. So with John Faso and Claudia Tenney and all these different members of Congress in upstate New York, when they go to these town halls. They want to be able to say to their constituents, look, this is something I did that was tangible to try and drive down the cost of your property tax bill. And it's also a way for these members of Congress to be able to put their names on a health care bill that right now is really controversial and that, many conservatives are still not that happy with.
Right.
So, Faso can say, well, listen, I didn't, the health care bill in totality, it's got its issues, but look at this property tax problem is a huge problem for upstate New Yorkers, and I went to Washington and did something about it. And that, that's something that can make their constituents feel good about the effort that they're making.
And it could really be putting the IOTUS on the governor to take care of these people on Medicaid, right? So
and
if they don't get taken care of, you can point your fingers to, well, the governor didn't take care of that. He had to come up with something there.
Right, exactly. And so, it's something that upstate New York politicians, both at the federal and state level, have crowed about forever, is that, the governor and downstate politicians have never seemed to care about what a burden this is for upstate New Yorkers.
Yeah.
And so now you're kind of putting the ball back in the governor's court by saying, look, we're going to make the feds are going to make you do something about this. And if you don't do something about this, well, then you're out of luck.
Right.
So it does put the ball back in his court. But I should also caution before we get too far ahead on this bill, the chances of this healthcare law or healthcare bill right now becoming law in its current form are very, very slim. They still have to get it passed through the House. It seems as though the president kind of threw a Hail Mary yesterday. He went up to Capitol Hill and was really leaning on some of these members. I think that in the Republican caucus in particular, there aren't many that want to be on the wrong side of President Trump. So this bill may get through the House. It's going to be a razor-thin margin. Mm-hmm. But when it goes to the Senate, it's going to be a whole different ballgame. And it's either not going to go at all or it's going to be changed dramatically.
Right.
And if that happens, whether or not this provision stays in it, because it's going to be much different at the end of the day, we're going to have to see.
I find it interesting that if you're a Republican and you decide to vote against it, you're really you're taking care of two crowds, the left and the right, all at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And that's the unique position that I think that Donald Trump is in. And I firmly believe that he is a Republican, but he is not the type of Republican that we've known forever, right? So he is, in many respects, one of the most independent presidents that we've ever had. And he prides himself on that. He doesn't fit the mold of what a traditional Republican president might be. So that's why you do see when, the ground that he stakes out in some of these debates, he's going to have critics on the far right. He's going to have critics on the far left. And the ideas that he's coming up with don't necessarily fit the mold of both of the traditional parties, which is, I think, one of the reasons that he has such passionate support among a certain crop of Americans that just are fed up with everything, particularly the political parties. So, you have that out. You either can draw the admiration of both sides of that political spectrum, and you can draw, the negative side of it as well. So it's a dicey time now to be in Washington because the climate and the mood of the American people is very unpredictable, and how they feel today may not be how they feel tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And you have a very polarizing president, and it's very difficult to determine which side of that coin you should be on.
Really, really interesting to see where this whole thing is going to go. It's and at this point, I'm not. It wouldn't be something I want to bet on right now.
Well, and I tell you something else, Bill. There's no question that the president certainly has his detractors, and his approval rating is not very good right now. Gallup has him at like 37%. But I was in Louisville, Kentucky, Monday night for his rally. He was in an old basketball arena there in Louisville. 20,000 people. They didn't even anticipate the number of people that ended up showing up there. They had a whole huge section of the upper bowl of that arena that was cornered off. And they had to take down the pipe and drape so that they could fit everybody in. And the people there were passionately behind this president. So he may not have the majority of Americans behind him, but the ones he does have are fervent supporters of him. And he feeds off that energy, and he's going to focus his energy on making those people happy, because they're the ones that got him in office, and they're the ones that kind of sustain his presidency. So the idea that, maybe most Americans aren't happy with him, the ones that do love him.
Yeah, they are active.
That accounts for something serious, I think, as this debate moves forward.
Ryan Nobles, formerly from here, and a lot of different aspects here, things that you did here. Ryan Nobles, CNN Washington correspondent, thanks so much. We'll talk again next week, man.
Thanks, Bill.
All right. We'll break and come back.